What's up, guys? It's Evan, and I'm here to do the lighting breakdown for these interviews from Chicago that I know people have been excited about. Hopefully these are informative. If you haven't looked already, I did do a little video, but there's a Dropbox folder associated with all of this, which has a lot of assets in it, which you can either walk through while you're watching this video, so you might want to pull that up, or you can do it before or after, really whatever your preferred style is, or all of the above. But so that includes walkthrough, pre-pro call, metadata on different clips and camera settings, different behind the scenes and stuff for each interview, as well as lighting diagrams and false color views, and a little sneak at the deck that I get. So a lot of stuff in there. I'm going to do my best to sort of explain my thought process behind this in a way that is one second, that is hopefully helpful in helping you guys accomplish this in the future and getting into my thought process. It's really interesting getting to work on something like this and have it come out the way it did, because I feel like a lot of the times when I was starting out, these were the kind of looks that I felt like I saw other people pulling off, and I just didn't know how to do it. And you know, they're not perfect, but for being really small crew and logistically tight, I think we did a good job, and I'm proud of them. So I guess to set the stage, I got called about this project. It's basically a brand film for an investment banking type company, family business, and so I get sent a pitch deck. And basically the pitch deck, the creative side of the pitch deck, if I had to mull it down, basically talks about why things are going to be the way they are, and says basically that this is going to be a interview and simple B-roll video. So this is some of what that pitch deck looks like. So there's some pulled reference frames. There's some scout photos that I believe the producer took at the location scout. There's those two things mixed together. There's also motion graphic references and stuff, but I didn't get into that because it wasn't really pertinent to this video. So I pulled these things. So I get this. I have a phone call with Corey, who's the director. You can listen to that whole phone call. It's in the Dropbox folder. It's like half an hour long. But we go through everything that I talk about. So if you want to hear the questions I ask, how I ask them, you can do that there. We talk about schedule, gear, so on and so forth, rental budget. But this was sort of our location setup. They didn't want the piece to feel boozy, so we didn't want to shoot into the bar, so that basically limited us to this study and library area. I knew that I liked this color contrasting wall. The bookshelves were cool. There were some cool practicals at play, and this area was much less at play. We knew that we wanted to do the interviews warmer, and that we wanted to do the B-roll cooler, and that the B-roll would most likely be in the same space as the interviews, because there was a good chance of rain. So the reference pieces were these two 1800 tequila pieces that Khalid did. You can find those on Vimeo if you want to watch them. But these were sort of some of the looks. I really liked it. My understanding based on the deck was that, like, this stuff's really cool. I also feel like we want to maybe be a little, not less moody necessarily, but just a tiny bit poppier. You know, these guys aren't quite full tequila brand on the like intense moody actor visuals. They want an aspect of that, which is sort of the classy high end, a little bit dramatic feel, but they also want to be clean. They want to be sharp. And so how do we sort of take some of these visuals and pull them in? So I mean, things that immediately stick out to me, looking at references like this and sort of getting a sense of the tone, are that there's a lot of far side keys. The interviews tend to be far side keys. They tend to be pretty soft, and the whole piece is relatively low contrast, but there's definitely some little harder, higher edges, like these edge lights you see on the fingers here, and other stuff. So I sort of usually get a look at something like this, and I have a sense of how I'll tackle it. I'm not really looking to like replicate it so much as to capture the overall feeling of it with my own spin. So that's sort of the deck. We talked through that again. You should listen to the phone call if you want to get a better sense of what that conversation looks like. So we sort of make a rough game plan. I fly out Sunday night, get into Chicago at like 6. We're mostly shooting with aux gear. I was bringing my monitor and a few other small things. And so at that point, I went out and got dinner with a friend, crashed at the hotel. We woke up at like 6:30 or something, rolled out at like 7. Ox and the crew was me, Corey the director, Alexis the producer, a sound guy / swing named Kevin, who's mostly a sound guy, honestly, but he did do a little swing. And then Dustin, who's Ox's gear guy and was ACing mostly, and a PA. Yeah, and I think that was our whole crew. Oh, and Katie, and an art department person who sort of was an extra set of hands. But so there was no real gaffer, there was no real lighting people, honestly, other than me. So Danny, our PA, and then Dustin would sort of jump in sometimes, but he was also heading up DIT and, certain other things. So it was definitely light and tight. Our rental budget, which I think you'll hear mentioned in the call, was $500. That being said, Ox owns their own Amira and stuff. So we used that money to rent a Hazer and 3 super speeds, got a 25, I think it is 24, 25, 35. No, I think we got 35, 50, 85. Yeah, I'm like 95% sure. We didn't use the 85. Corey wanted a longer option, which you'll hear about in the call, just with sort of considering Boca, but we shot everything on the 35 and the 50. The interviews are all on the 50. The B-roll is pretty much all on the 35, I think, except for maybe some of the indoor stuff. We might have stayed on the 50. So pre-pro call, we get to the location. We actually got there early because we didn't hit any traffic, so we hung out for like an hour. We location scouted outside a little bit, Corey and I did, and found some of the locations that you'll see in the later B-roll. And then we did our walkthrough. They let us in at 9 while the rest of the team was loading in gear. Corey and I sort of walked around and looked at what our options were in the space, so you can sort of hear that conversation and see things. It's not the most cinematographically, that can't be the right word for that, interesting video, but it does show you what the conversation looks like, and you can sort of see our thought process and see us sort of eyeball, well, what if we go this way, what if we go this way, what are the issues, where do we get depth, and you can see sort of how that conversation plays out. So we have the walkthrough in here. So we made our plan. Our plan of attack was to do these 3 interviews. We wanted to start with the one that we felt most confident in. We decided to film to save the setup closest to the windows for last, for lighting reasons, because we were expecting to have a 12x20 solid, and it got forgotten at the office, so we didn't have a big negative to black out the window, so we just decided to save that one for last. So we got right into lighting our first interview. So we can look at interview 1 over here. And I pretty quickly had a pretty good sense of what I wanted to do. I had a sense of the look. I had a sense of how I wanted to accomplish it. And so I actually ran around while they were still loading in gear, and I made some little tape X's, and I marked off where I thought everything would go. So that says 2-foot crossfade. Then over here, there should be a tape that's where we're expecting talent to go. Spot for the silk, spot for the quasar, and a spot for another quasar. And then if you look at our diagram, it's pretty similar to that too. There's the initial crossfade, talent, quasars, silk, and I think I marked the camera spot right after that. But so I had a pretty good sense of what I wanted to tackle. This is sort of how it ended up looking when it was all said and done. And you can sort of see, again, you have access to these videos if you want to pan through them. We staged base camp over near the bar because we knew we weren't planning on shooting at the bar, so gear wouldn't be in the way there. And basically, the first steps for me for actually figuring out the look here involved location started setting up all these little candles. I know I wanted to play the practicals in the background, but we had to fiddle with them. We had control of the overheads, thankfully, and most of them were on dimmers, so that was in play as well. But my sort of overall game plan was that I wanted to do a soft, warm push as a far side key as our general key light. So Ox has, I think it's an 8 by silk, push 2 quasars through that. then decided to do a quasar pushed a little bit cooler as more of an edge light on the same side as the key, just super subtle. And then we were playing with our fill level through a combination of this beadboard was doing a little bit, and there's a crossfade on the couch back here, which initially I was playing with using as a like a kicker on talent or a fill light, but I ended up flagging it off talent actually because we didn't have a dimmer for it. We only had 2 dimmers, so one was for the edge light and one was we ended up get used on the key. So we just flagged that crossfade off a little. Using some gaff tape. If you take black regular gaff tape, run it down the side of a quasar, it makes a pretty good little flag because you can sort of control how much light you're knocking off. But so I knew that I wanted the key sort of in this position. I wanted this rim. I had a good sense of generally what the angles would be. And I knew that that would bleed us some light, that our big soft source would bleed us some light into the background here. I knew that we were going to have to play with what we did with the background, but I usually figure that out after straightening out the rest of it. Oh no, my C100 battery is low. That's okay, I can swap it. So that was sort of the general game plan. Was I communicated this actually. We started getting it all set up, and then once we sort of got everything roughed in, then we could look at it a little more closely. I'm going to do a real quick battery swap on this guy. This is high production value, people. Bam. And we should be back. There we go. So we sort of got all this stuff roughed in, and then it's all about sort of playing with your overall levels. I think initially, let me pull up our metadata thing here. I couldn't remember if we ended up using any ND or not on this. I think we ended up not. So then I think if we go outside, you can see ND. It just says Iceland. 0.3. Nope. 0.6. Oh, ND filter 0.6 recorded. Yeah, so the ND did get kicked on at some point. I don't think we ended up using it for the interviews. Actually, at one point we were playing with it because we were sort of, it's a process of me roughing things in, us looking at the monitor, playing around with it. So you don't necessarily get to see the full iterative process of lighting here. I'd like to do that in the future. I'm debating just putting a GoPro on myself and filming a whole process of lighting in interviews so you can see the stages that the monitor goes through and whatnot. But anyway, so soft push, then we have a little bit of a really subtle edge here. Boom's coming in this side. This guy's just giving us just the tiniest bit of lift on the fill side. And we honestly spent more time fiddling with these background lamps than anything else, because they were both sort of in limited positions. So we played with swapping the bulbs out on them. We were able to put a little dimmer on this one to control the level of it. And we were just sort of playing with fanning them around. We also had art department was sort of messing with pulling lamps out, putting lamps in, sort of just making space feel fleshed out, which is another thing that I would say is really important, is don't just take for granted that everything has to look the way it does. Move stuff around when you can. And I don't know that I explicitly said this already, but a huge part of this is that they found a killer location. This whole look is impossible if you're like in a white-walled conference room, so you sort of need a location with background texture to really pull this off. So if we go back over here and we go interview frames, so this was sort of the look we ended up with on the bottom here. And so you can see that far side key, which is why the right side of his face, frame right side of his face, is illuminated. The other side, we have some good fall off. The edge is soft enough, but not too soft. We have good eye lights going on. We have good illumination and interest in the background. We have enough contrast, but there's still level on his face. It's not like it's too dark on the fill side of his face. And a big thing there is I find that a lot of people, when they want to fill in, say you get a good key light, but the inside of his face is really dark. Like this one's a little bit higher contrast, I think. Say you wanted to lift that a little bit. A lot of times people point a light at the fill side, and it's just this smaller source, and it's a harder light. it's a harder light. It doesn't fit in as well. And so one of the things that you'll see here is that our key light is medium sized. I would say, it's like an 8-foot silk. So it's pretty big. It's not super close. It's pretty big though. And that's one of the nice things I will say about going with like an 8x over like a 4x is to get a 4x that soft, you have to put it really close to your talent, which can be in the way of the person interviewing and stuff. And 8x is big enough that it stays soft further back. I've mentioned this in other videos, but the softness of a light is determined by the surface area of the light. So the bigger the surface area, the softer the light, which is why like an 8x is double as soft as a 4x. So 8x gives a soft light. Even though it's further back, it stays soft because it still appears big. I don't want to get into all that, but apparent softness, imagine when the sun is huge, but it's really far away, so it looks small to us. Like if you look at the sun, it looks like a physically small object, which is part of why it casts such a hard light on the middle of a summer day. But like when it's cloudy outside, the clouds look big to us. You can usually see clouds as far as the eye can see. And so the light is very even and very soft. So the sun is bigger than the clouds, but the clouds appear bigger because they're closer. So the clouds are softer. Hopefully that makes sense. Continuing onward. So all of these are pretty similar keys. This one's a little smaller. I think you can see it and feel it. Like these little edges of where the light rolls off, you can feel that it's just a little bit snappier than some of these are. I think this is probably the softest because I think the light is closest to him, and so there's a really smooth gradient from the shadow to the highlight side of his face. So we go in, we start eyeballing stuff, which basically for the most part for me just means getting stuff dialed in. We have our PA standing in for us, which you'll notice in some of these behind the scenes pictures. And one of the things that we played with is rotating the silk situation. So let's see if you can see. So I playing with exactly where the quasars were, and I ended up putting the quasars behind the silk further to the key sides, like further away from the camera, and sort of fanning them across the silk. And I found that gave us a little bit of a nicer roll off due to the gradient on the silk. So sometimes you play with where your lights are behind your diffusion, and then I played with the angle of the diffusion as a whole, which mainly affected the highlights and reflections actually on the shelves in the back of the room. So we sort of wiggled that really quickly, and just I'm eyeballing the monitor as we're doing it, get that to a place that we like it. And that was pretty much it, so as you can see here, key light is these two quasars fanned into a big soft source. The Dana dolly's here and allows us to get a good range of motion. We're shooting into a corner that is lightened up with practicals and these little T lights. The quasar over here I think is mostly bouncing around the wall and just sort of raising the overall level in here a little bit. Hazer intermittently being used to just sort of lower overall contrast and soften everything up a little bit. The beadboard honestly wasn't doing much. We mostly used it just to fan the haze, but it was doing a tiny little bit of something in there.
There's plenty of times where you have
So
to be
all that to say, that's how we got to our
But then there's
finished
plenty of
look.
times
These
we
are
have
not
to say,
final
no,
graded
they're-
frames. They just have RE K1S1 LUTs, which are basically like Rec 709 LUTs.
It's not like
But I don't
the
know. I
real
haven't
estate
actually edited any of this, but
this
if
commodity
you
where can
look at a
walk through it
little
and see
bit
all
of
this
this
with
in
4 bedrooms, a
motion,
real nice sink and everything. There's such complexities to a business that
Of course, I can't find one of the clips that I actually want. They were sort of long interviews. Each interview, I think, was like 40 to 60 minutes long. I also don't really like doing Dana Dolly interviews personally, honestly. And I think you'll hear that in the call with Corey. I sort of asked about doing full-size dolly, but wasn't in the card. So anyway, that was setup 1. And if you look at these pictures with Dustin in them, right after we finished rolling, I had Dustin hop in real quick before we took a break for lunch, just so you could sort of see what each light was doing. So it's not quite perfect because he moved a little after I went to go switch lights, and so he's not in focus the whole time, but I think the idea still comes across. So this is with everything on. This is exactly as it looked with our talent in the seat, but now Dustin's sitting there. And then this is with the Quasar crossfade off the little 2-foot that was on the couch. So you can see it's just sort of, it's just adding a tiny bit of fill. It's adding a tiny bit of light in the background. It's not doing a whole lot, honestly, but it's doing something. And some of that is just the iterative process. Like, we don't always A/B it. Maybe it was doing more at one point and then we moved some other stuff around and it was doing less, but that's what that little guy's doing. Then here you see what happens if you turn the 2 crossfades into the silk off. This is when Dustin leaned forward. So what you're seeing here is just what that little edge quasar is doing, which is a 4-foot. So it's relatively soft, but it's also relatively over on the far side of his face. And so if you look, it's just sort of casting a little bit of cooler light over in here. And if you go back to here, you can sort of tell where the cooler light is mixing with the warmer light, and it's just creating that extra little bit of pop on this side of his face. And the other way you can see that is you go to him when this last frame is just the silk without the edge light, and you can see that it's really soft and it's really warm, but it doesn't have quite the same pop that having that little bit of cooler light in there does. And then this is with no lights on, and you can see the practicals, and we sort of played with how those were falling. But you can sort of go through those and see what each light's doing. Again, the first one is with everything. Second one is everything but the 2-foot quasar. Third one is just the edge light and the practicals. Fourth one is just the 2 crossfades into the silk. Last one is just the practicals. So hopefully that's helpful. One other thing I would say, or 2 things I would say on this front, are that the process of lighting this, I'm not too specific about color temperatures. So it's sort of like, I think I started setting the quasar color temperatures sort of based off the color temperatures in the rest of the room. Then I color balanced the camera and we went down to like 2900. You can check the metadata for that. And then I tweaked the separation between each quasar just by eye again. So I wasn't really looking at the numbers, so I couldn't tell you exactly what each quasar is set to. You could probably sort of get a sense of it if you look at that behind the scenes video. But I look at it and I sort of eyeball the color separation. And then I go to the dimmer and I initially set this guy's level, just the 2 4-foots into the silk, to where I'm happy with our key. And then I turn the edge light on this guy, and I turn it all the way up so you can super see it. And then I turn it down until you almost can't tell that it's there. And so it's really, really subtle in there. And that's something that I would say is a lot of the time, whether you're adjusting fill, key, or anything, it's really subtle tweaks that end up dialing these kinds of things. Again, the difference between these 2 images is tiny, and the difference between even this to this can feel tiny, but a lot of the times it's the difference between something that's really killer and something that sort of looks like most of everything else. So that's sort of most of my thoughts on interview 1. You can also see the reason I included this was just so you can see I always check my false color on the monitor when I'm going, and this is what more or less what I was seeing on set. And I just sort of trusted at this point, honestly. I know that most of this is sitting in that low 10% range, 10 to 20, I guess, if you look at the blue and where the blue and the purple are mixed together. I knew that his skin tone being below like 70, 80 was good. That was just sort of where I wanted it to be, because I didn't want him to be too hot. I didn't want there to be too much contrast, and I was sort of trusting. I have a 703 now. I was able to trust it pretty well, but I always double check just to make sure there's no weird clipping or anything, and I was just fine with this guy clipping. There wasn't much we were going to do about it or anything. It doesn't look bad. So yeah, you can sort of see the ratios using that. Again, that's all done by eye. I wasn't really metering it. I did quickly meter it at one point, but then I tweaked it after that. So it's not helpful information, unfortunately. But I would say just practice getting used to what you like. Learn to trust your monitor sometimes, I think. But also just practice. Some of it just comes with a little bit of intuition after doing it for a while. So I've lit enough of these at this point that I felt pretty okay with it. But if you wanted to paint by numbers and put your exposure levels similar to mine, this is sort of what you'd be looking for. You could also pull these frames into Tom's false color plugin, and or your monitor, whatever else, and you could pull, if you're using the RE false color or something, you could use that instead and pull the values. I used the small HD preset. So interview 2, we moved over to do interview 2, which is this one in the middle, which was a cool look. This one was really high. He was sitting at the table. This one was really low. We had to raise his chair up on apple boxes. Initially, there was a lamp back here behind his head that was really annoying. We pulled that lamp out, and it ended up, I flew something in over here. I forget what. I think I moved the lamp initially, and then Katie, our art department, brought over the plant. The plant was a little too green on green, so added this extra little lamp as well. So there's actually a pelican sitting on the couch, and then these are sitting on that. So again, just sort of filling in dead space, helping liven out the frame. This was the trickiest one to light, and that was part of why I put it second. It was also logistically simple, but I knew it was going to be the hardest because we had room to far side key him here. We didn't really have room to far side key him in this one, so I knew that was going to be the tricky one to light. This one was real easy because we had tons of space, but things always get trickier when things are tighter. So the process for interview 2, if you sort of look at this guy, what we had to do was we sort of flipped the camera to get, and that's the first thing I do is flip camera and just sort of look at our framing. And then I'll work on getting our key up. So Corey and I looked at the corner. We looked at how high we'd have to get the chair. We put the chair on apple boxes, which you can sort of see here, to get him up a little bit, so that we could shoot more like up into the corner and less down into the couch. And then I took the beadboard, put it in the corner, and just took the quasars and blasted them straight into it. So the reason for me to do this rather than to just stick the quasars in the corner is, again, that a bigger source is a softer source. So a 4-foot quasar is soft in one direction because it's 4 feet, but in the other direction it's not as soft because it's only like 1.5 inches or 2 inches, whatever it is. A 4-foot beadboard that's lit up by 2 quasars is 4 feet by 4 feet of softness. So we're going to get a lot more wrap out of the beadboard than we will out of the quasars themselves. So we bounce into the corner. The one catch with that is the beadboard's technically further than the quasars, so whatever. But that was sort of, I wanted to get the light far enough that it wasn't all up in his face and stuff. So we put this beadboard in the corner. It's literally just leaning up against the corner. We shot the quasars into it. The initial problem was that there was just light going everywhere, and so we took this 2x3 solid and just flagged the light off so that it's not bleeding all onto the wall behind him. So it's still the same output and softness and everything on him because this flag isn't affecting his ability to see the light source at all, but it's making it so that this wall behind him can't see the light source and just darkening the whole thing. So we're still getting enough bounce because this light is actually bouncing off the wall that's on frame right and back onto our back wall, so it's still bringing up the level a little bit, but it's not as bad as it was when everything was just spilling around. So sometimes just controlling that light can be really helpful. So here you can see sort of that. Corey's sitting down. This is the lamp that was behind the talent. You can see the Dana Dolly. What you can't really see is that the Dana Dolly is sitting on apple boxes turned sideways as well, because our like mini lowboy stands were too tall for this shot. I'm a big believer in saving time by using practicals on stuff like this. So as soon as we put his key up, I tried to set up our background light more. I took this light and I turned it sideways so you can see it's sort of blasting this wall. And the main reason is that blasting this wall and dimming it all the way up turns this wall into a big soft source because it's physically large lit up area. And so that sort of fills in his fill side a little bit. So I decided to use the practical to help with that, and this other practical is sort of fanned off onto the background over here, just illuminating this area a little bit. The nice thing that also happened was since this practical has a physically small bulb, it's a pretty hard light, so I didn't want it directly hitting the talent, so it's pretty fanned off of him, but it's still hitting our lamp and our plant, and so you can see these hard shadows came out because it was a hard light hitting them, and if this flag wasn't here, you wouldn't really see the hard shadows because the light from this guy would overpower it. So flag ended up accidentally helping bring out our hard shadows, which are sort of a cool added depth thing behind talent. So we had the key. I liked the key. I wanted to sort of stretch just a little bit more and wrap it a little bit more, pull the level around the side of his face as well as push into the corner more. So I pulled our extra quasar tube and the silk, and it's really low output. It's really only doing a little bit, but it was just sitting there and playing with the dimmer and, just picking up that inside edge like 5%. And so here you can see what I'm seeing on the monitor. And sometimes it's A-Bing it, and it's me going to, someone say Danny RPA, and I'll be like, hey, the quasar with the silk, turn it on, turn it off, turn it up, turn it down. I'm sitting there at the monitor, just helping dial that in. Excuse me. So you can see setup 2. This is more or less what we had going on. The practicals are over here. Obviously, you can't see them. Oh, this guy's not supposed to be here. Go away. So yeah, we have our 2 vertical quasars into our beadboard. We have a flag stopping it from going off on this wall, and that's our predominant key. And then hazers over here, which we just sort of keep it in the room but not too close to talent. Would periodically hit it and then fan it. We fan it with a solid after this. And then this guy is just sort of bringing some more light around to the far side of our talent's face, the fill side, from the key, and helping to just raise that level a little bit around this side of his face, raising up this shadow side of his nose a little bit so it's not too high contrast, pushing just a little bit of extra light back into this corner, and it's just a really tiny, teensy tasty thing. So if we look at the pictures of Dustin in this scenario, this is with everything on, and so you can sort of see the eye light, which is also being created by the reflection of the beadboard in his eyes. So we have a good eye light, which I'm a big sucker for good eye lights. And we have pretty good wrap and shape on his face. And then the next picture is when we turned the key off. And it's really interesting how quickly it all just sort of flattens out, and you can see how big a difference having something like that makes. So this is mostly just the practicals overhead, which we were also playing with dimming the practicals a few times. Mostly they were off, but sometimes if I needed to raise like the background just a little bit, I would turn the overheads just barely on, because I didn't really want them hitting talent, but I was okay with them going around the room a little bit and like illuminating the frames and stuff. So you can see without that key light, everything just sort of flattens out. We lose most of the eye light. It all just looks really blah. And so if you just put a silk in front of him, even if you brightened it up, it would look pretty blah, because it's flat. There's no real shape. But this shape of having highlights and shadows really helps make the whole thing pop. And then this is without the silk on at all. Unfortunately, I don't have one that only has the other guy on, only has the key on. So you can sort of see there the process of, again, this is what the frame looks like with none of our lights. Then we add layers to sort of help bring out certain areas of the frame, and it helps create this idea of layers of contrast. So it's a little bright over here, it's a little dark over here, it's a little bright over here, it's a little dark over here, it's a little bright over here. And so it sort of like brings you through the frame, and hopefully you have composition and lighting that brings you towards your actual subject, but you have layers of depth for your viewer to sort of tackle. Again, if you want to see exactly where stuff is sitting in here and whatnot, you can go poke through some of these, see the camera setup. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment. I don't think I mentioned, but we were shooting at about f2 on the super speeds all the time. Here just under f2, I think, like around a 1.8. Here you can see similar lighting. His keys right around the 60 area, it's green. Then there's a roll off to the dark blue on the fill side, and then it rolls over to just the edge of purple over here. And so you can sort of see, and then some of our background lights are up in that 80% range. So that was sort of interview 2. Again, I highly recommend playing with all of these, and you don't need to play with these specific tools. You don't need to just use quasars or whatever else. Like, it's not super specific. If it's a bigger light, it's a softer light. If it's a smaller light, it's less soft of a light. It's a harder light. So you can always play with practicals in your home. You can play with bouncing a small light, like a little 650 into a 4x. It would do the same thing as those 2 quasars into the 4x, basically. So don't get caught up in the tools. Try to focus on the concept behind it, whether that's soft light, hard light, mixing color temperatures. And again, the key was just a little bit bit cooler in that to also separate them. It's not like enough separation that you feel like there's like an orange and blue split. Overall, it still feels warm, but it just adds that little bit of like white popping on the inside. So interview 3, which is this one we did last. We went out and shot B-roll outside before that. Honestly, the B-roll was just sort of catch what you can, try to find good places. It was a cloudy day, so light just was what it was. It didn't really have too much there. We knew we wanted it cold, so I pushed the camera white balance way over for the exterior B-roll, and you should be able to see that in here as well. I don't know if I mentioned this already, but these are created using FullCat. It's a really cool piece of software. Let's see, white balance, 3200. Yeah, so I stayed tungsten white balanced outside on a cloudy day, and that's what pushed all of this stuff extra blue. And I was mostly shooting it around ISO 640 and 800 because I wanted this to stay relatively clean, and I knew we were going relatively moody. A lot of the times I would push to go to like 1280, but I didn't want this to like accidentally get too textured because it wasn't really the feel of the overall piece. I don't think we went above 800. I know I was playing with 1280 a few times, but I don't see it anywhere in here. So yeah. Third interview, same sort of thing, same plane of attack. I actually gave them my lighting plan again while we were going out to shoot B-roll because it was sort of just take the plan from this one and replicate it over here. So if we look, interview 3, same thing again. Green on the inside. This one's a little bit lower. I sort of wish there was a tiny bit more green on this side because it's a little too soft, I think. Maybe you could probably pull a little bit out in the grade, but here you can see, so we moved over to this side of the room. You get a better sense of the space in that scout video. And basically we wanted to shoot into this bookshelf. Initially we were planning on shooting more into the bookshelf, and then we realized that we really liked the depth of shooting back into this room where we were before. So we turned some lights back on back there. They flew this floor lamp in because this is a big like emergency exit black door, and so they covered it with a lamp so you can't really tell that it's there. And then it was the same general plan. Camera is at about a 45 degree to our talent with room to dolly back and forth and get some different frames. Our key is this silk with 2 fanned 4-foot quasars into it, a little on the warmer side. Then we have an edge light pushing a little bit cooler to help cut that inside edge of the talent. We have a little bit of fill, just managing the shadow side of the talent, and then we're just playing with practicals and moving candles around to keep the background interesting. So you can see here's our edge quasar, just sort of giving us a little bit of kick, being a little cooler. These are all shot on a 50. I think I said that already. Outside stuff shot on 35. Here you can see the position of these 2 quasars sort of fanned across. This is what we're looking at on the monitor. Yeah, we turned these back practicals on to just raise the level in this room a little. I think we fanned those 2 like desk lamps that you saw in the first interview back into this near side wall that you can't see, so they would bounce back out into the room. And then far side, slightly cooler quasar. Turned the overheads on above him a little bit just to help pick up the shape in these bookshelves a little bit. That was pretty much it. It's a pretty simple plan, people. So, I mean, some of the things that I can say you would want to keep an eye out for if you were looking to do something like this are you sort of need a space that has darker walls. It doesn't have to be dark because you can light around it, but you need some tones in there. And if it's just like white walls or really light walls, you're going to have a hard time creating shape. It helps if there's objects you can put in the background, whether plants or books or candles or pictures. There's a lot of depth in here and texture because of background objects. So really a ton of this look is carried by production, finding a good location. But then once we get into there, we went with a 50, which gave us enough compression on our background that our subjects would pop out, but let us see the space enough that it wasn't just like a talking head on bokeh. We far side keyed everything warm and then added a little cool layer on top of it just to help it pop a little bit, and then managed our contrast level using soft fill sources. You have to use big soft fill sources so that it's not black, it's not too dark on the fill side, that you can see just a little bit. And so we managed that inside level using soft sources like that, and using bigger sources slightly far away, like using our 8x with 2 quasars into it. Though it might give us the same softness as 1 quasar up close, it gave our talent a little more space to not feel so confined and lit. It gave our director more room. It also makes it so that, due to the inverse square law, which we haven't super gotten into, but if there's a light up close and they're moving, they'll sort of move and get a lot brighter and darker just due to a little bit of movement. But when the light's further away, their movement has less effect. So by doing a bigger source farther away, we stay soft without getting too funky with anything else in that sort of department. We didn't really have to deal with negative. Other upside of darker walls is that you'll usually get some return, so you do get fill coming in off of them, but you don't have too much fill, so we didn't have to really use a lot of negatives to help shape these sorts of things. I highly recommend digging into the process and the conversations in the pre-pro call and the walkthrough, because those are pretty critical. We set ourselves up for success during the walkthrough by deciding to shoot closer to the windows at the end. I can also really quickly show you guys a little bit of some of the B-roll frames that we shot. These, again, are not final grades or anything. But shooting in the same space, we basically white balanced really cool, and had them play around. Most all of these are lit with a single quasar. I think it might be the 2 quasars, 1 or 2 quasars into that silk again, and just letting that play a little hotter and letting the practicals play a little cooler. So we picked these off real quick at the end of the day after we shot all the interviews, and it was really just finding a cool frame, far side keying our talent. In an optimal world, I would have loved to like turn these guys off, but we were just in a rush and didn't think about it. But anyway, yeah, far side keying with that silk. Same thing here, far side keying with the silk, letting ourselves play around with the space, being confident in our exposure. This is some of the exterior stuff, which is all shot sort of white balanced, the same daylight balanced for tungsten. These lenses are so sharp and so nice at T2. Trying to keep our camera movement good, just trying to keep everything solid. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm trying to think if I forgot anything. If I did, just comment it. Let me double check the comments on here real quick. How much of this was you were after going in versus looking through the monitor, adjusting moving lights around until you found something you liked? I mean, I had a pretty good sense that this was optimally what I wanted it to look like. I actually didn't know what talent looked like until they got there. So like they ended up looking even better than I thought they would. But I had a pretty good sense that this was what we were going for. In my head, it might have been a little bit hazier and a little bit lower contrast, but I actually prefer the way it ended up because I think it fits the overall client and the project better than going like full 1800 tequila thing. But the individual frames definitely are a little bit of tweak as you go and play with the room once you see the room. But even if you listen to that pre-pro call, we talk about shooting into this corner and shooting into this corner. And so we had a pretty good sense of what we were getting ourselves into going in. Could you talk about exposure, the ratios between the foreground and the background? It's a lot of just eyeballing, honestly. It's not too specific. Again, if you want to sort of get a better sense of what those look like, you can pull up that Dropbox folder and you can pull up the false color frames that are in here, so you can sort of see the actual values and get a sense of the difference in brightness and darkness in each area of the image. But as far as like a stop value or ratio, I don't quite have that. I more just go off the false color in my own eye for me personally. I think I remember seeing you shooting at around 2750. Were you looking to match to candlelight or for any other creative reason? I forget if the picture's in here or not. I did take a picture of the monitor. We're shooting at 2900 ISO 800. All the B-roll was shot at 60p, by the way. There wasn't a super creative reason for shooting at 2900. As far as like I was trying for something specific, it was more like overall we wanted this warmer look. And dimmed tungsten tends to be even warmer than regular tungsten, which is another pro tip that I didn't know at first. Every time you dim a tungsten lamp, it gets like more orangey. So since there was a lot of dimmed tungsten in the room, and there were candles in the room, I skewed a little bit cooler by going 2900 rather than defaulting to like 3200. I just felt better about it. But that was another just sort of like looking at the monitor, pulling things around to sort of get them to where I felt good about them. Interested in seeing how you approach color, contrast, composition, their relationship to your location. I assume you chose your location based on style, but no location is perfect. How do you approach these problems? I'm also curious how you frame the subject story matter of the interview. Story/subject matter of the interview. The composition in these frames are unique. How do you aid the story with your composition, camera movement? I feel this would be difficult in an interview setup. I mean, I guess I would say to the first question, I approach color, contrast, composition, and their relationship to the location by taking advantage of everything I can, whether that's practicals in the space, little tea lights that they were lighting up while we're there, or anything else. I'll take all the texture you give me and do what I can to help make it pop. Excuse me. The location was picked by the production company, so I wasn't really involved in that, honestly, but I liked it. I thought it worked out really well. Curious how you frame for the story/subject matter of the interview. It really depends. Honestly, these were sort of... because we knew we were going to be leaning on the interviews a lot, part of it's just keeping it visually interesting. In certain projects, you really lean into like short-siding the tense moments and really lighting for the tension and, you know, doing more head-on stuff for the happy moments and whatever else. But these kinds of pieces, like, I try to be aware of the content, and I try to do movement to reflect that. I honestly prefer like doing like a doorway dolly or a full-size dolly or an easy rig to like a Dana dolly, because a Dana dolly just locks you into like the same thing. There's not that much you can do. But it's part of it is just sort of keeping it interesting so that, you know, if this is a 2-minute long piece, if we're going to see, say, 40 seconds of each person, that whatever 40 seconds they cut down out of a 45-minute interview looks visually interesting. And so these shots all move during the course of the actual interview. This guy isn't short-sided all the time. I haven't had enough coffee today. The background, you can't really see this deep all the time. Sometimes it's more profile and shooting right into here. Same thing with this guy. It swings all the way out to the front sometimes. There's a whole range of motion, and it's really just keeping it visually interesting more so than super specific story beats. Because at the end of the day, these guys are talking about their journey as business people. They're talking about what they do. There's elements of tension. There's elements of rejoicing. There's elements of community. But we don't get the luxury of like super specifically framing up each moment so much as I'm trying to pick a look that is neither too happy nor too sad, you know, that you can play it for whatever part of the story and it'll still feel solid. That being said, I try not to be like super profiling and short-sighted if they're telling about like their happy times as a family, and I try not to be too just like dead on and simple when it's a really complex part of the story. But you can play that a little bit by ear as you go. It's definitely difficult in an interview context, though. So I think you do what you can. I sort of would talk through it with the director between takes, but it's about all I can offer you on that front. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, if you guys have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I really want this to be helpful, and I want it to cover any questions you might have. I try to dig into all of it, but sometimes my brain short circuits. So go through the BTS stuff, go through the frames, go through the metadata, see if you have any questions. And honestly, there's no dumb questions. If it's like, hey, how do I do this with this light that I have? If that doesn't quite click for you, like, feel free to ask. There's no dumb questions here. So much of this was never explained well to me by DPs when I was starting out, and it was just like, how do you light that? That doesn't make sense. That's why I like doing the like turn one light on at a time thing, because you can sort of see what each thing is doing. But I really do recommend just playing with stuff as well, whether that's pulling your girlfriend or husband in to be a lighting model for you and just letting you play a little bit or something. It really helps to just get time under your belt lighting these kinds of things. And that's one of the things that thankfully I've gotten to do a lot, is light a bunch of interviews that most of you will never see to get to make a few interviews that look decent. But yeah, listen to the pre-pro call. Check it out. If you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully this was worth it to you guys. Trying to make this a killer month on Patreon for all y'all. If you haven't listened to Iceland Q&A, go back and do it. I just saw a final edit of the first video, and it's actually cooler than I thought it would be, which I probably shouldn't admit, but it's true. So I'm excited to share that. I asked Jesse if I can share it because we talked all about Iceland and you guys didn't even know what we were shooting really, aside from our explanation. But I think that was great. I could post up just the audio of that if you wanted, because we don't really go over visuals. So if you would rather an audio only version of the Iceland Q&A, let me know. And yeah, that's it for now. Be posting some other stuff soon. New episode of the podcast just went up. And yeah, I love you guys. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for supporting me on here. I really do appreciate it. I hope this was helpful, and I'll talk to you guys next time.
the gloom of life, but this girl isn't like you. Bringing an alarm clock, waking to the shock of light that I want to run into. Another drink and we all stay. Another drink and it's okay. Another drink and we all stay. Another drink and it's okay. I wanna feel fine, I wanna feel fine. I wanna feel fine. Without you I just lose my mind. I wanna feel fine, I wanna feel fine. I wanna feel fine. Without you I just lose my mind. I wanna feel fine, I wanna feel fine. I wanna feel fine. Without you I just lose my mind. I wanna feel fine, I wanna feel fine. I wanna feel fine. Without you I just lose my mind. I wanna know why you'd be this way, hanging on to every word they say. We live alone, we live a lie. We're on fire, we're on fire. Another drink and we all stay. Another drink and it's okay. Another drink and we all stay. Another drink and it's okay. I wanna feel fine, I wanna feel fine. I wanna feel fine. Without you I just lose my mind. I wanna feel fine, I wanna feel fine. I wanna feel fine. Without you I just lose my mind. I wanna feel fine, I wanna feel fine. I wanna feel fine. Without you I just lose my mind. I wanna feel fine, I wanna feel fine. I wanna feel fine. Without you I just lose my mind. We live alone. Hit the gloom of life. Like you, bringing an alarm clock, waking to the shock of